The jungle didn't care who fired first. It had rained the night before, and the leaves still trembled with droplets, glinting like cold tears in the morning light. Somewhere nearby, smoke coiled above the treetops, rising from yesterday's battle. The air was thick with moisture and gunpowder, and beneath the canopy, 2 wounded soldiers lay in opposite directions, hidden, breathing, bleeding. Armin had crawled from the wreckage of his squad's last position, dragging his injured leg behind him like dead weight. Every breath was shallow, every movement a gamble. His rifle was slick with mud, his uniform torn and stained. The last time he saw another human being. It was a flash of a helmet and a scream before everything vanished in an explosion. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, but when he opened his eyes again, the sun had shifted, and so had the silence. There was someone else here. Yusef was curled behind the stump of a fallen tree, not 20 meters away. His face was bloodied, and his left arm hung limp at his side, but his eyes were open, and they were locked on Armin's. For a long moment, they simply stared. No words, no motion, no gunfire, just 2 exhausted men, staring at the one thing they were trained to destroy. Yusef's hand slowly moved toward his weapon. Armin did the same. Their fingers curled around their triggers. But something strange happened in that stillness. Nothing. They didn't fire. Because neither of them could lift their weapon. Because neither of them wanted to be the one to end it. Because something deep inside them, beneath the training, beneath the orders, beneath the flags, whispered enough. Armin spoke first, his voice hoarse, barely audible. "Are you alone?" Yusef didn't answer. He didn't understand the language, but he nodded. Armin coughed, wincing. "Me too." He pointed to his leg, then pointed to Yusef's shoulder. 2 broken men. No threat. No backup. No escape. They might have been enemies on paper, but paper didn't survive in the jungle. Rain began to fall again, not heavy, but enough to turn the ground to sludge and soak through the fabric of their clothes. Armin shifted himself under a low branch, trying to shield his rifle. Yusef simply closed his eyes and leaned back against the stump. They weren't hiding anymore. They were resting. That night, thunder rolled in from the east. Neither of them slept. The jungle sounds grew louder in the dark, the chirps, the howls, the rustle of something larger than both of them. But neither moved. They kept their distance, but their awareness of each other was constant. Morning broke like a sigh. Armin fumbled in his pocket for a ration bar half-melted chocolate and something that might have once been oats. He looked over and, after a pause, tossed it in a slow arc toward the stump. It landed near Yusef's foot. The man stared at it for a long time, then picked it up and bit off a small piece. He chewed slowly, staring at Armin, not with trust, but without fear. That was something. The second day passed without a word, but when Armin stumbled while trying to relieve himself behind a bush, Yusef didn't move to take advantage. He watched, and that was all. Later, Yusef gestured to his canteen, then to Armin. A simple question. Armin nodded. Yusef rolled the canteen across the ground, and Armin caught it. They shared water. That night, they both sat near the same low-burning fire, no more than glowing embers hidden under rocks and leaves. It was dangerous, stupid even, but the cold had started to bite, and neither could afford another fever. Armin took a stick and scratched a circle in the dirt. Then he drew a square inside it. Yusef watched, then picked up a smaller twig and scratched beside it 3 lines, A roof, a window, a house, a home. Arman pointed at it. "You?" he asked. Yusef nodded, then tapped his own chest. "Sister," he said softly. Arman didn't know the word, but he knew the look. He nodded, then tapped the ring on his left hand. "Wife." Yusef smiled faintly, then drew a tiny heart in the corner of the dirt, a fragile symbol between men who once would have shot each other on sight. The fire cracked softly. Somewhere in the trees, a bird called out. It was the first peaceful sound they'd heard in days. The trees didn't know the flags they carried. The mud didn't care whose blood it absorbed, and the wind blew just the same over both of their heads. By the time dawn returned, they had moved their shelters closer, still apart, but near enough that the warmth of their small fire could reach them both. Trust had not come, but something else had. Necessity, recognition, humanity. For now, they were not enemies. They were two wounded men in the middle of a forest that wanted to forget the war entirely. And maybe, for a few hours, they could forget it too. The rain did not come all at once. It came slowly, like a visitor unsure of its welcome. First a few shy drops on the leaves, then a soft mist drifting in sideways. Arman sat beneath his crude shelter, made of torn canvas and branches, watching the sky darken with something that felt more like sorrow than weather. Yusef was a few feet away now, hunched beneath a sloping tree trunk. Their distance had narrowed, not by decision, but by instinct. Two wounded men crawling closer to a warmth that wasn't just fire. Neither of them had spoken since the night before. They didn't need to. There was a strange language growing between them, built from glances, gestures, and the rhythm of shared survival. As the rain thickened, the silence became something heavy and protective. Arman reached for his boots, inspecting the torn laces. The wound on his leg was swollen now, and it ached with a deep, hollow throb that reminded him of something unfinished. Every time he tried to stand, the forest spun. He was too weak to hide it anymore. Across from him, Yusef watched. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached into his own bag and pulled out a strip of clean cloth white, almost sacred in its plainness. He hesitated, then tossed it over. It landed near Arman's knee. Arman looked at it, looked at Yusef, then nodded once. No enemy gives you clean cloth for your wounds, unless he is no longer your enemy. With shaking fingers, Arman removed the soaked bandage from his leg and tied the new one. His hands fumbled. The cloth slipped. Then suddenly Yusef was next to him, not rushing, not threatening, just kneeling, helping, without a word. Yusef took the cloth and tied it tightly, gently. His touch was rough, but not unkind. He checked the wound, winced, then mimed fever. Arman nodded. He felt it, too. They sat back in the dirt, shoulder to shoulder now, because there was no point pretending otherwise. In the rain, surrounded by nothing but trees and mud, two men had chosen to survive together. Hours passed. The fire hissed into silence. Water dripped from the leaves like ticking clocks. Arman broke the quiet first. He pulled a small notebook from his inner pocket, wet and stained, but still legible. On the first page was a drawing, a house, a woman, a little boy. He handed it to Yusef. The man turned the pages carefully. One by one, there was a sketch of a wedding ring, a child's toy car, a poem in a language he couldn't read, but he understood. Yusef pointed to the woman and raised an eyebrow. "My wife," Arman said, softly. then pointed to the boy. My son. Yusef stared at the drawing a long time. Then he reached inside his own jacket. He didn't have paper, but he had something else. He pulled out a small, worn button blue, with a tiny crack down the middle. He placed it in Armin's palm and curled his fingers over it. My brother, he said, then touched his chest. Little brother. Armin swallowed hard. Alive. Yusef shook his head. There were no words, only the rain. The moment hung there fragile, aching, real. They did not cry, but their silence did. Night crept in again. The jungle sounds returned, louder this time, like the earth was waking up with teeth. The two men built a new shelter together, a patchwork of branches and torn uniforms, close enough that their bodies could share heat. They ate the last of their rations side by side, chewing slowly, saying nothing. That night, Armin woke to a sound. Breathing fast, panicked, Yusef was shaking beside him, caught in the grip of a nightmare. His fists clenched. His mouth moved, whispering words in a tongue Armin didn't know. Armin didn't think. He simply reached out, placed a hand on Yusef's arm, and said, "It's okay," over and over, a human lullaby. And after a while, Yusef's breathing slowed. The nightmare faded. The rain kept falling. By morning, their roles reversed. Armin burned with fever. His skin was pale, and he couldn't keep down water. Yusef tended to him like a medic, without training, breaking leaves to press against his skin, whispering stories in his own language that Armin couldn't understand, but somehow comforted him anyway. He even sang, softly. It was a lullaby, or maybe a prayer. It didn't matter. It worked. Armin slept. The rain slowed. A new peace settled over the forest, unspoken, temporary, but sacred. Later that day, they sat beneath the dripping leaves and shared a single canteen between them. Armin raised it in a shaky toast. To peace, he said. Yusef didn't know the word, but he smiled anyway, because he understood. As the sky cleared for the first time in days, the sun broke through the trees, and in that golden light, their shadows overlapped. Two men, no uniforms, no ranks, no orders, just a shared silence, and a truth too big to speak aloud. There is no enemy in the rain. The sky turned gold as the sun filtered through the thick canopy, casting long, warm shadows across the jungle floor. For the first time in days, the rain had stopped. The silence it left behind felt reverent, almost sacred, like the pause between the last note of a hymn and the start of prayer. Armin and Yusef sat by what remained of the fire, little more than glowing coals now, but warm enough to keep the chill away. They didn't speak. Their communication had moved beyond words. It lived now in gestures, glances, and the simple act of sitting side by side without fear. Armin picked up a thin stick and dragged it across the dirt beside them. He wasn't sure why, but the urge to mark something to claim this moment was irresistible. He drew a long line. Then, slowly, he wrote his name Arman. He looked at Yusef, then pointed at the letters. Me, he said softly. My name. Yusef stared at the letters for a moment, then nodded. He reached out, took the stick, and scratched his own name beneath it. Yousef. They sat quietly, looking at the two names in the dirt. Different letters, different languages, but side by side, like old friends signing a pact. Armin smiled and tapped his own chest. Armin. Yusef did the same. Yusef. Names spoken aloud felt like something sacred, like confessions whispered to the trees. It was a strange thing, to feel so deeply connected to someone you could barely speak to. But Armin had stopped questioning it. The war had taken so much from them both. This small companionship, fragile and silent, felt like a seed of something human in the rubble of everything inhuman. Yusef picked up the stick again and drew a simple shape, a rectangle with a triangle roof. A house, Armin guessed. Yusef nodded. Then he drew a small stick figure beside it, a smaller one beside that. He pointed to the larger figure. Mama, then the smaller, Zara. He tapped his chest. Brother. Armin's breath caught. He understood now. His sister. Gone. Yusef looked away quickly, blinking hard, but the grief didn't need explaining. It lived in both of them. Armin reached into his coat and pulled out a small photograph, crumpled, water-stained, but still intact. A woman with long hair held a chubby-cheeked toddler in her arms. Both were smiling. He held the photo out. My wife. My son. Yusef stared, nodding slowly. Beautiful, he said. The word didn't matter. The feeling did. They passed the photo back and forth like a precious relic. It connected them not just as soldiers, but as men with people waiting for them, or not waiting anymore. Armin took the stick and began drawing again. A long road, a small car. Then he added dots along the side's trees. He pointed at it. My way home. Yusef nodded, then added his own sketch. A river, a bridge, a town surrounded by hills. They weren't just two soldiers anymore. They were cartographers of their own pain, mapping memory into soil. A breeze rustled the leaves above them. Suddenly, they heard something, a branch snapping nearby. Both men froze. Reflexively, Armin reached for his rifle. Yusef mirrored him. They looked at each other, breathing heavily, bodies tensed. Another sound this time, a voice, faint in the distance, not shouting, searching. A patrol-friendly enemy. It didn't matter. Armin looked at Yusef. They had seconds to choose. If they ran, they might be seen. If they stayed, they might be discovered. But more than fear was the question. Would they be seen as friends or enemies? Yusef was the first to act. He took the stick and swiped across the names in the dirt, erasing them quickly. Then, without a word, he dragged some leaves across the ground, covering the photo tracks and sketches, erasing the proof that they had ever been anything but strangers. Armin understood. Some things were too delicate to survive exposure. Once hidden again, they lay flat in the brush, motionless, heartbeats thudding like distant drums. The voices faded. Silence returned, but not the same silence. This one was louder, echoing with the sound of what might have happened if they had been seen. After a long time, they sat up again. The dirt was blank, the sketches gone, but the memory of it all, names, sisters, roads home remained etched somewhere deeper than any soil could hold. Yusef took a breath and looked at Armin. Then, with a half smile, he reached out and pressed his palm into the soft earth. A perfect print. No name, just presence. Armin did the same, side by side, two handprints in the mud. It wasn't a flag. It wasn't a boundary. It was a monument to survival, to brotherhood, to something wordless and fragile blooming in a place that had only ever known blood. The trees swayed gently overhead. Birds returned to their songs. The jungle, ever indifferent, bore witness to a moment that no one would ever see, but that two men would never forget. The night arrived without warning, cloaking the jungle in velvet shadows. The fire they managed to coax from damp branches flickered weakly, its glow barely reaching the edges of their small clearing. Still, it was enough. Enough to see each other. Enough to feel not entirely alone. Armin sat with his back against a wide tree trunk, trying to stretch his wounded leg without groaning. The fever had passed, for now, but weakness clung to him like a second skin. Across from him, Yusef carved small notches into a flat piece of bark with the tip of his knife, marking something neither of them had spoken about. Time moments. Loss. It didn't matter. A cicada chirped somewhere high above them. Armin looked up, then chuckled softly. "In my village," he said, "they say when a cicada sings at night, it's calling to someone who's already gone." Yusef tilted his head, not understanding the words, but sensing the meaning. He pointed to the sky and whispered, "Zara." Armin nodded slowly. "Zara," he echoed. Yusef smiled faintly, then did something unexpected. He began to hum. It was quiet at first, so soft it blended with the rustling leaves. But slowly, the melody took shape, a lullaby, foreign, delicate, rising and falling like waves. There were no words, or perhaps there were, but Yusef didn't sing them. Just the melody, a song, remembered in the bones. Armin closed his eyes. It was a different kind of war. This one, the one fought inside the heart. "I know a song," he said. And when Yusef finished, Armin picked up the tune where he had left off. Not the same song, not even the same rhythm, but something parallel. His voice cracked, worn by exhaustion, but he sang anyway, a melody from his childhood, one his mother had used when the wind outside howled and the power flickered out. Two melodies, two countries, two wounded soldiers, harmonizing across silence. When the last note faded, they looked at each other. No applause, no need. In that moment, they were more than survivors. They were human. A loud boom cracked in the far distance, reminding them that war hadn't forgotten them. Somewhere, men were still dying. Orders were still shouted. Guns still roared. But not here. Not in this tiny pocket of peace. Yusef gestured to the sky, then folded his arms and mimed sleep. Armin nodded. They needed rest. Their bodies were frail and battered. Their minds stretched thin, and so they lay beneath the trees, the stars blinking through the canopy, the fire burning low, but neither of them slept. Not right away. Instead, they talked, or tried to. Gestures, names, memories. Armin mimed a camera, then drew the shape of a book. "Journalist," he said. "Before the war." Yusef raised his eyebrows, then pointed to himself. He mimed lifting a hammer, building something. Builder, Armin guessed. Yusef grinned. "Home." "You built homes." Yusef nodded. The irony sat between them. The man who built homes and the man who wrote stories were now here homeless, voiceless, swallowed by a war neither had asked for. "Why are we even fighting?" Armin muttered, not really expecting an answer. But Yusef pointed to his own heart, then to his head, and shook his finger like scolding a child. "Not from here," he seemed to say. "It comes from up there. Orders, governments, men in suits. Not from the mud. Not from the music." Armin laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. The fire crackled. A twig snapped nearby, and both men tensed, reaching slowly for their weapons. But it was nothing. A bird, perhaps, or the jungle, reminding them of its presence. Still, the moment had passed. Sleep came soon after, fitful and light. In the morning, Arman woke to find Yusef watching him, not with suspicion, but with something like protectiveness. He handed Arman a handful of berries, small, dark, and hopefully not poisonous. Arman took one, bit into it cautiously, and smiled. Sweet. That day, they worked together. They reinforced their shelter, gathered more firewood, checked their wounds. They even laughed real laughter, the kind that takes you by surprise and leaves you a little breathless. Arman had tried to explain a joke about a goat, a ladder, and a wedding dress. Yusef didn't understand a word, but the absurdity of the mime had them both in stitches. It felt normal, dangerous. How normal it felt. In the afternoon, a helicopter passed overhead. They both froze. It was painted in neutral colors, no markings. A medevac. They looked at each other, unsure. This could be rescue, or arrest, or worse, return to opposite sides. Arman stood slowly, raising a torn piece of white cloth. Yusef grabbed his arm. A beat of hesitation. Then he nodded. Together, they tied the cloth to a branch and propped it up high. The helicopter didn't stop. It passed, silent and unaware. Maybe it was better that way. The day faded. The jungle, golden again. They sat side by side, not speaking. Arman took a stick and drew in the dirt. Not names this time, just music, notes on a staff. Yusef watched, then added to it. Together, they wrote a song in symbols they both understood. A quiet song, not for radios, not for orders. A song for them, for the war that didn't use bullets, for the brotherhood that rose quietly between ashes. The sun had not yet risen when Yusef knew something was wrong. Arman was shivering violently, his skin slick with sweat despite the morning chill. His breath came in quick, shallow bursts, and his eyes barely opened when Yusef shook his shoulder. "Hey," Yusef whispered, kneeling beside him. "Arman." A faint groan was the only reply. Yusef cursed softly, pressing the back of his hand to Arman's forehead. It burned. The infection had returned fiercer than before. The wound on his leg was red, swollen, and oozing beneath the bandage they'd changed too many times. They were out of clean cloth, out of fever reducers, out of time. Yusef rummaged through their shared supplies, half a canteen of water, some crushed berries, a few dry matches, and a single vial of antiseptic that Arman had kept hidden. The vial trembled in Yusef's hand. He could save it, use it for himself if he ever got hurt. Or he knelt beside Arman again, gently lifting the leg and cleaning the wound with what was left. Arman whimpered, but didn't wake. The infection had gripped his body tightly now. Yusef poured the antiseptic onto the wound, watching the skin hiss and foam. He whispered something soft in his own language, not a prayer, but a promise. "You'll get home. You have a son. You have to go back." For hours. He sat beside Arman, cooling his forehead with damp leaves, humming lullabies, feeding him small sips of water when he stirred. The fever raged. The sun climbed and then began its slow descent again. Yusef didn't leave his side, not when the heat became unbearable, not when the hunger clawed at his own ribs, not even when his own leg started to ache from where he'd twisted it days before. Even pain, now, was shared. That night, as darkness returned, Arman opened his eyes for the first time in hours. His voice was barely audible. "Why are you still here?" Yusef smiled weakly. "Where else would I be?" Arman tried to laugh, but it came out a wheeze. "Should have left me. Could have made it out." "No," Yusuf said simply. We don't leave each other now. Arman turned his head, blinking against the shadows. There's only one bullet, he said, in the rifle. Yusuf nodded. I know. If they find us, I'll throw the rifle away. Arman closed his eyes again. One bullet, 2 hearts. They both fell silent. It was the first time they acknowledged the weapon not just as a tool for survival, but as a symbol of what had brought them here, and what could still tear them apart. That night, the jungle seemed quieter than ever. No gunfire, no helicopters, no voices, only the deep, rasping breath of fever, and the occasional crack of a cooling branch. Yusuf stared at the rifle propped against the tree, the last bullet inside. He hated it. He hated what it had meant to him just a week ago. He hated the weight of it, how it dictated who lived and who died, how it had been designed to end stories, not begin them. He stood up slowly, walked to the edge of their clearing, and dug a shallow hole with his bare hands. Then he buried the rifle, not as a gesture of surrender, but of defiance. Let them come. Let them see that something had changed. When he returned, Arman was awake again, though barely. I dreamed of my son, he whispered. He was running. I couldn't keep up. You will, Yusuf said. You will go back. And you... Yusuf didn't answer at first. I don't know, he said finally, but I'll walk beside you as far as I can. The next morning, the fever broke. Slowly, Arman's eyes cleared. He sat up with Yusuf's help, and even managed a sip of water without spilling it. You stayed, Arman whispered. Yusuf nodded. Why Yusuf paused, then pointed at Arman's chest. Family, then to his own. Mine, too. A lump caught in Arman's throat. He looked away quickly, blinking hard. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sunrise filter through the trees. The warmth of it didn't just touch their skin, it soaked into something deeper. Later that day, they ventured further from the shelter, slowly, supporting each other. Arman's strength was returning, though his leg still dragged. Yusuf's ankle was swelling, but he never complained. They moved like wounded animals, quiet, watchful, but determined. At the edge of a hill, they saw it, smoke. In the far distance, rising in steady trails, curling into the pale sky, a village, a camp, a way out. Yusuf looked at Arman. Arman nodded. We go together. They didn't speak much as they made their way back to camp. Their silence had shifted from fear to trust, from isolation to shared burden. That night, Arman took the stick and wrote in the dirt, 2 soldiers, 1 bullet. Both survived. Yusuf looked at the words, then added his own, because we chose each other. They covered the message with leaves before they slept. Some truths they had learned were not meant for the world, only for those who lived them. The smoke they had seen wasn't from a battlefield, but from a small outpost hidden deep in the jungle neutral ground used occasionally by medics and supply teams. They reached it at dawn, bodies shaking, breath ragged, hearts uncertain. No guns were raised when they approached, just confusion. 2 soldiers from opposing nations, limping side by side, clothes soaked in blood and rain, covered in dirt and ash. Their faces said everything: exhaustion, pain, and something else, something stronger than fear. A medic stepped forward, holding out both hands. Weapons, he asked cautiously. Yusuf raised both hands first. Arman followed. We buried it, Arman said quietly. The rifle. The medic didn't understand the words, But he understood the meaning. They were taken in. No questions. At least not at first. The medics cleaned their wounds, administered fluids, and gave them clean clothes. Separate tents were prepared. Their names were taken down. Their nations were notified. They were no longer just two men in a jungle. They were now two pieces of a puzzle, two living headlines, two questions no one could answer. Why didn't you kill each other? What made you choose mercy? The journalists came first, followed by commanders, then politicians. Everyone wanted a statement, a quote, a lesson. But neither Arman nor Yusuf gave them much. Not because they didn't have anything to say, but because some truths couldn't be packaged for the evening news. One day, a young reporter sat down across from Arman, pen poised, recorder ready. "Tell me," she said gently, "when you saw him, your enemy, why didn't you shoot?" Arman looked out the window. The sky was quiet that day. He didn't answer her directly. Instead, he said, "We both had only one bullet left, and neither of us wanted to waste it on another man who looked just as scared as we felt." The reporter frowned. But wasn't he the enemy? Arman turned back to her. Not in that moment. In that moment, he was just someone who didn't want to die alone. Elsewhere, Yusuf was asked similar questions. His answers were simpler. Sometimes just a shrug. Sometimes a single word. Enough. Enough death. Enough hate. Enough of forgetting what it meant to be human. Months passed. They were returned to their countries. Arman went back to his wife and son. The first time his boy touched his face, he wept, not because he'd survived, but because he had come back whole. Yusuf returned to his village, but Zara was gone, buried in a small cemetery by the river. He planted olive trees near her grave, one for every year she had lived. They wrote to each other, letters that crossed borders through unofficial hands, carefully worded, deliberately vague, just enough to say, "I'm alive." Are you? Years passed. A fragile peace was negotiated. Borders were reopened, not completely, but enough. Enough for one day, years later, for a reunion to be proposed. A peace ceremony, symbolic, carefully staged, but real. Both governments wanted the story to end with a photo, the two men, former enemies, shaking hands in front of cameras, a message of unity, of forgiveness. But the moment they saw each other again, no cameras, just silence. They didn't shake hands. They embraced, not for the press, not for the story, but for themselves, for what they had survived together, for the nights of fever and songs and silence, for the bullet they never used. At the ceremony, a question was asked by one of the hosts, a question both had expected. After everything, what do you call each other now? Arman looked at Yusuf, then turned back to the crowd. He smiled, his voice soft. When they ask, he said, "Say we were brothers." There was no applause, just a stillness, like the hush before a storm. Only this time, it was not fear that filled the space. It was something else, something like peace. They were handed medals, both of them. Neither wore them. Instead, they walked out of the hall together, away from the microphones, away from the politics. And as they stood beneath the same sky where they'd once buried a rifle, Yusuf took something from his pocket, a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to Arman. It was the sketch, the one they had drawn in the dirt, the music, the song without lyrics. Arman smiled. "You kept it." Yusuf nodded. "I never forgot." Neither did Arman, and neither would the world. Not because of the speeches, not because of the ceremony, but because in the darkest days, in the most impossible of places, two men had chosen to see each other not as enemies, but as humans, as brothers, between bullets.